So, welcome everyone to our check-in chat series, our Defining the Movement series. And we are currently going to be discussing the past, present, and future of activism in Tigerland. So, our special guest today is Professor Tomiko Meeks. Hello, Professor Meeks.
Hello, everyone. How are you? How are you, Mr. Regas?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for coming on. You are a professor extraordinaire in the Department of History, Geography, and General Studies. So we have a lot that we could discuss right now. TSU has always had a rich history. With period, but within the community, with Third Ward, and with pretty much every movement and social justice issue that's come across the city. So I guess the obvious reason we're kind of doing this is to kind of help our students kind of process through the movement that's going on right now, and kind of connect back to the community here. We haven't been together since March, and so we wanted to kind of do this virtually and trying to give opportunity to kind of connect the activism and social justice issues that are upon us right now, and tying it back to the school. And that's where your expertise comes in. Like, I guess first and foremost, how are you processing everything and dealing with everything?
So it's heavy, right? It's really heavy to look at everything that's going on, and it, in many ways feels like we're being fed this steady diet of violence that's very reminiscent of what was happening, at the turn of the century, at the turn of the 20th century, in the 19 teens, in the 1920s, right? This just steady diet of violence that, for me, is just unnecessary, right? And it's born out of, I would say, ignorance and fear of other people, which is, we claim to live in this very diverse nation that our fundamental principles are on liberty and justice for all, and that's just not the case. And so to see this happening day in and day out, it's emotionally draining. Intellectually, it's also draining, right? Because as a student of history, you would think that we would learn lessons from what has happened in our past and be able to not repeat those things. But apparently that's not the case, right? So yeah, and just sitting and having to sit with it, sort of, right? Because of all of the other things that are going on with COVID, and sometimes it just makes it hard to be out there on the front lines really doing something. So that added weight of just having to sit with it and process it, I've been doing a lot of thinking about it and writing about it, and just talking to my children who are college age themselves, and how they're processing it and the way that they're looking at the world. Right. So yeah, it's emotionally and intellectually heavy.
Completely, yes. It's and it doesn't help with the 24-hour news cycle. Like, everything just keeps bombarding us all the time. But as a student of history, how do you, and like you said, you see history repeating itself, and I can't imagine being a historian knowing all that you know and seeing things keep repeating over and over again. But how do you see what's going on right now reflect on TSU's own history with activism in the area and in the city?
So I think that's a very interesting point, because if anybody knows the history of TSU, you know that TSU was born of racial strife, of racial conflict. And So, you know, sort of this convergence of all of this, and it's happening right here in Houston with George Floyd being a product of Third Ward. It's just, it brings up, and I wasn't there, I'm not originally from Houston, right? But I know quite a bit about the history of Houston, just in general, and how Houston came to be, how Freedman's Town came to be in Houston, and how TSU, because I've written extensively on Freedman's Town, and knowing about the history of TSU, and knowing that it was African Americans who wanted more, who wanted to be educated in the same ways that whites were being educated, and they were not being afforded that, right? And so you have this racial strife that's happening in the 20s, and then you get these two junior colleges, if you will, that are established, one white and one black, and just how, like, we have not, my words, we have not matured, right?
Right.
Enough to be able to move beyond racial tensions. It's very disconcerting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, knowing that University of Houston, that sits right across the street from us, right? Which today is, you know, by all accounts, very diverse, did not want African Americans gracing their campus. And just having to deal with all of that. And sometimes I feel like there was sort of this shadow that was cast over Texas Southern in many ways. So
Yeah, definitely. It's I mean, we're literally one street away, and it could be a world apart.
we
So
definitely are a world apart.
we are.
And when, you know, Roy Cullen was donating the land that Texas Southern was eventually going to sit on, and then giving money to U of H to build the buildings, and making a statement that, oh, this needs to be a college for the working men and women of Houston. You know, the underlying reality was that U of H was going to be the university for white working men and women, and TSU was going to be that school for African Americans. And so, you know, we cannot sit and think that racial tension is somehow divorced from all of that. No, it's not.
Oh yeah.
And then, you know, moving forward and thinking about how Texas Southern itself, you know, came to be with the Heman Sweat case, and how the University of Texas denied him admission to their law school purely on the premise of his skin color. Because if you look at the record, you know, even the court said, like, there was nothing there that precluded you from being able to be admitted except your color, right? And so, you know, and then thinking that somehow within a year, so from 46 to 47, somehow in a year, you're going to get together a whole law school that's somehow equal to the University of, no, like that doesn't happen, right? And like clearly understanding that the common denominator in all of that is race. It's plain and simple, it's race. And even the name of Texas Southern, before in 51 it's changed to Texas Southern, is Texas TSUN, Texas State University for Negroes. Like, it's very, very clear. Like,
right. And it's
a line in the sand here.
Completely. And it's definitely interesting because I'm starting to hear from people that went to UT, and the story's a little different on that end.
Of course the story would be different. Just as the story is different just right here in Houston on the way that the two entities came to be, the two universities came to be.
Yep. Yep.
And that's why, and this is something that I try to really impart on my students, is that you cannot take one side of the story and run with that, and that's the gospel. No, right? That's the beauty of having primary sources and being able to critically think about those primary sources and the story that's being told, right? Because there are things that are going to be said that are not actually written down.
Oh, yeah.
So in many ways, you need to read between the lines to get the full picture of what's going on. And then think about, like, well, why is the story different at UT? Like, what are they trying to protect or not protect, or so.
Or fluff over, yes.
Yeah.
No, that's completely understandable. And I'm glad we have this important history lesson to our students to read between the lines and to really research your history, right?
Yes.
Um,
Because information is out there.
it is.
Like, you can go and pull up old newspaper articles, you can look at the court records. It's like the information is out there. Yeah.
Definitely. And when it's important to really look into the history. And how do you see, I guess, moving from the initial founding of TSU, going on through the years of like the important events that have happened in TSU's history? Like I know the most obvious one that people refer back to is the TSU riot of '67. People love using the word riot on things that involve marginalized people.
Yeah, I do not like that term. But before we even talk about that, I think we have to, we have the establishment, right? Then in 60, there are sit-ins, right? Where
Yes.
students are looking and really working to dismantle Jim Crow. And so you have like 13 students who are protesting and are walking to Weingarten grocery store and sitting at the counter so that the counter can be desegregated. So, this whole idea and this whole push for social justice didn't start with 67, right?
No.
It started well before that. I feel like I said that, I feel like it started with the creation of Texas Southern. And then we see in March of 1960, right, you have that, the sit-ins that are happening. And understand that, like, students were always sort of involved. They had a real sense of what was going on in Houston during the 1950s, during the 1960s. And so they were there, right? I think that what's interesting and why 67 gets so much of a spotlight shown on it is because 67 was sort of like the thing that broke the camel's back, right?
Right.
You have all of these little incidents that are happening all around Houston. So on the north side of Houston, you have